At the altar, whispers cut through the sacred silence like knives. He sold himself for her money. A black man with nothing, marrying a crippled billionaire. How convenient. Stephen Carter stood motionless in his ill-fitting suit, facing hundreds of judging eyes. Beside him, Olivia Bennet sat in her wheelchair, wrapped in white silk, worth more than everything he had ever owned. Then the bride gripped the armrests. Slowly, impossibly, she rose to her feet. The gasps that followed would echo for years. But the truth she revealed next silenced them all. 6 months earlier, Stephen woke to the sound of his son coughing in the dark. He held his breath, listening. The cough was dry, short. Not the deep rattle that used to send them rushing to the emergency room. Just an ordinary cough. Stephen let himself exhale. The apartment was freezing. The heating had been shut off 2 weeks ago, and the blankets he had hung over the windows did little to stop the November cold from creeping in. Across the room, Marcus slept on a fold-out couch beneath layers of thrift store comforters. Stephen pushed himself up and walked barefoot to the kitchen. The refrigerator light flickered before revealing its near-empty shelves. Half a carton of milk, 3 eggs, bologna that was 2 days expired. He cracked the eggs into a pan. Behind him, small footsteps shuffled across the floor. "Daddy?" Marcus stood in the doorway, rubbing sleep from his eyes. At 10 years old, he was small for his age. The doctors blamed the heart condition that had required surgery 2 years ago. That surgery saved his life. The debt it left behind was still destroying Stephen's. "Morning, little man. Wash your face. Breakfast is almost ready." They ate at the small table by the window. Stephen gave Marcus 2 eggs and kept one for himself, claiming he wasn't hungry. His son ate slowly, savoring each bite the way children learn to do when meals aren't guaranteed. "Daddy," Marcus said quietly, "Tommy told me something yesterday." "What did he say?" Marcus kept his eyes on his plate. "He said people like us don't get nice things. He said I wasn't born for that." Stephen's grip tightened on his fork. Tommy was a classmate whose parents owned car dealerships and bought him new shoes every month. "Tommy's wrong," Stephen said. "You deserve everything, Marcus, and I'm going to make sure you get it." His son nodded, but doubt lingered in his eyes. Stephen hated seeing it there. After breakfast, he walked Marcus to the bus stop. Other children waited in warm coats and clean sneakers. Marcus wore a thin jacket and shoes with cardboard stuffed inside to cover the holes. When the bus arrived, he climbed on without waving goodbye. Stephen stood alone in the cold long after the bus disappeared. This was his life now. 2 jobs, sometimes 3. Days at the auto shop, nights stocking shelves at the grocery store, weekends taking whatever work he could find. And still, every month, he fell further behind. The medical debt from Marcus's surgery hung over him like a sentence, over $90,000 that grew with interest faster than he could pay it down. Last week, a letter from the bank had arrived. The mortgage on his mother's house was 3 months overdue. Foreclosure proceedings would begin in December if he couldn't pay. He had already sold his car. He had sold his mother's jewelry, her furniture, anything worth cash. He had taken loans to pay other loans until the spiral seemed endless. Stephen walked to work in the gray morning light, wondering how much more he could possibly give. The call came 3 days later. Stephen was under a pickup truck at the shop when his phone buzzed. He ignored it twice before finally sliding out to check. The number was unfamiliar. "Mr. Carter?" A woman's voice, formal and clipped. "My name is Ruth Simmons. I knew your mother years ago before she passed. We lost touch, but I've kept track of your family from a distance." Stephen frowned. The name sounded vaguely familiar, something his mother might have mentioned once. "I know this is unexpected," Ruth continued, "but I need to speak with you. It's important. Can you come to the Whitmore Hotel this evening, 7 o'clock? Ask for me at the front desk." Before Stephen could respond, she hung up. That evening, Stephen stood outside the Whitmore Hotel, feeling completely out of place. The building towered above the street, all glass and marble and doormen in pressed uniforms. People walked past in clothes that cost more than his monthly rent. He almost turned back. But curiosity won. Ruth Simmons was waiting in a private lounge on the third floor. She was a thin woman in her 60s with sharp eyes and expensive jewelry. She gestured to the chair across from her. "Sit down. I'll be direct. I work for the Bennett family. I've been their head of household staff for over 20 years. Stephen sat, unsure where this was going. Kara Bennett, the family matriarch, has a daughter named Olivia. You may have heard of her. She inherited Bennett Industries after her husband died 3 years ago." Stephen shook his head. He didn't follow news about billionaires. "Olivia was in the same accident that killed her husband," Ruth continued. "She survived, but she's been in a wheelchair ever since. She's become reclusive, bitter. Her mother is concerned about her future, about the family legacy." Ruth leaned forward. "Kara is looking for a suitable husband for Olivia. Someone stable, quiet, and willing to accept certain conditions. Someone who won't make waves." The implication settled over Stephen like a weight. "You want me to marry her?" "I'm presenting you with an opportunity," Ruth said. "The arrangement would be contractual. You would sign a prenuptial agreement. You would have no claim to her assets. But in exchange, your debts would be paid. Your son's medical care would be covered. You would never worry about money again." Stephen stared at her. "Why me?" Ruth's expression didn't change. "Because you're desperate enough to say yes and decent enough to honor your word. Kara has rejected dozens of candidates. They were too ambitious, too greedy, too obvious. You're none of those things. I'm being chosen because I have nothing. You're being chosen because you have everything to gain and nothing to leverage." Ruth stood. "Think about it, Mr. Carter. I'll give you 1 week." She left a business card on the table and walked out. Stephen sat alone in the empty lounge, the card untouched in front of him. His mind raced through everything Ruth had said. A marriage for money, a contract, a transaction. Everything inside him screamed no. He thought about his father, who had worked 40 years at the same factory and died with his dignity intact. He thought about his mother, who had raised him to believe that integrity mattered more than wealth. He couldn't do this. He wouldn't. But that night, Marcus asked him a question. They were sitting on the fold-out couch, sharing a blanket because the apartment was too cold. Marcus was doing homework, struggling with a math problem. "Daddy," he said without looking up, "are we going to lose the house?" Stephen's heart stopped. "Where did you hear that?" "I heard you on the phone. You were talking about money." Marcus finally met his eyes. "Are we going to be okay?" Stephen wanted to lie. He wanted to promise that everything would be fine, that he had it all under control. But his son had learned to read his face too well. "I'm working on it," he said. "I'm going to figure something out." Marcus nodded slowly. Then he asked another question, quieter than the first. "Is it my fault? Because of my surgery?" The words hit Stephen like a physical blow. "No!" he said fiercely, pulling Marcus close. "Don't ever think that. Your surgery saved your life. That's all that matters. Everything else, the money, the bills, that's not your burden, that's mine, okay?" Marcus buried his face against Stephen's chest. "I just don't want to be the reason you're sad." Stephen held his son and stared at the ceiling, feeling something crack inside him. Later, after Marcus fell asleep, Stephen sat in the kitchen with Ruth's business card in his hand. He turned it over and over, watching the light catch the embossed letters. He thought about Marcus asking if it was his fault. He thought about the doubt in his son's eyes at breakfast. He thought about all the things Marcus had already learned to live without: new clothes, warm meals, a father who wasn't exhausted all the time. Stephen had always believed that integrity was worth more than money. He still believed it. But integrity couldn't pay for his son's medication. Integrity couldn't keep a roof over their heads. What was his pride worth if Marcus grew up believing he wasn't born to have nice things? Stephen picked up his phone and dialed the number on the card. Ruth answered on the second ring. "I'll do it," he said. "But I want to meet her first. I want to meet Olivia." "That can be arranged." Ruth's voice betrayed nothing. "I'll be in touch with the details." The line went dead. Stephen set the phone down and stared at his hands. They were rough from years of labor, scarred from countless repairs. Working hands, honest hands. He wondered if those hands were about to sign away everything he believed in. For Marcus, he told himself. This is for Marcus. But even as he thought it, a part of him knew that this choice would change him. That once he stepped through this door, there would be no stepping back. He just hoped the man who came out on the other side would still be someone his son could be proud of. The Bennett estate sat behind iron gates at the end of a long private road. Stephen had never seen a house this large. It wasn't a home. It was a monument, all stone columns and endless windows reflecting the winter sky. A driver had picked him up that morning in a black car that probably cost more than he would earn in 5 years. Stephen had sat in the back seat watching the city fall away, replaced by rolling hills and properties hidden behind walls and hedges. Now he stood at the front door, feeling smaller than he had ever felt in his life. Ruth appeared before he could knock. "You're on time." "Good. Come with me." She led him through a foyer larger than his entire apartment. Crystal chandeliers hung from ceilings that seemed impossibly high. Paintings lined the walls, portraits of stern-faced men and elegant women who looked down at Stephen with expressions he recognized. He had seen that look before, in the eyes of people who believed they were better than him simply because of what they owned. They stopped outside a set of double doors. "Olivia is inside," Ruth said. "She knows who you are and why you're here. I suggest you be honest with her." "She despises pretense." Before Stephen could ask what that meant, Ruth opened the doors and walked away. The room beyond was a study filled with books and leather furniture. Sunlight streamed through tall windows, illuminating dust motes that drifted lazily through the air. And there, near the fireplace, sat Olivia Bennett. She was beautiful. That was Stephen's first thought, and he immediately felt ashamed of it, as if noticing her beauty somehow diminished her. She had dark hair pulled back from a pale face, and eyes that studied him with an intensity that made him want to look away. Her wheelchair was sleek and modern, nothing like the clunky hospital equipment Stephen had seen before. She sat perfectly still, her hands folded in her lap, watching him cross the room toward her. "So you're the one Ruth found," Olivia said. Her voice was cool, detached. "The desperate single father willing to marry a cripple for money." Stephen stopped walking. "Is that what you think I am?" "I don't know what you are yet. That's why you're here." She gestured to a chair across from her. "Sit." He sat. "My mother wants me married," Olivia continued. "She believes a husband will stabilize me, give the company confidence, produce an heir to continue the family legacy. She doesn't care who the husband is, as long as he's controllable." Her eyes never left Stephen's face. "You're here because Ruth thinks you fit the criteria. Poor, desperate, unlikely to cause problems." "Your friend isn't wrong about the first two things," Stephen said. "And the third? I'm not here to cause problems. I'm here because I have a son who deserves better than what I can give him." Something flickered in Olivia's expression. Not warmth, nothing that soft, but something shifted behind her eyes. "Tell me about your son." So Stephen told her. He talked about Marcus, about his illness, about the surgery that saved his life and the debt that followed. He talked about the foreclosure notice, the mounting bills, the way his son had started asking if everything was his fault. He didn't embellish or seek pity. He simply told the truth. When he finished, Olivia was quiet for a long moment. Most men who come here try to impress me, she said finally. They talk about their accomplishments, their ambitions, all the things they could offer me. You just told me how much you've failed. I haven't failed my son, Stephen said. Not yet. That's the only thing that matters. Olivia studied him the way someone might study an unusual painting, trying to determine if it was genuine or a clever forgery. We'll see, she said. Ruth will show you out. 2 weeks later, Stephen signed the prenuptial agreement. The document was 47 pages long, filled with legal language he didn't fully understand. It stated clearly that he would have no claim to Olivia's assets, no ownership of property, no financial rights of any kind. In the event of divorce, he would leave with nothing. In exchange, his debts would be erased. Marcus would receive full medical coverage for life. A trust fund would be established for his son's education. Stephen signed every page without hesitation. The lawyers exchanged glances. Kara Bennett, who had insisted on being present, watched him with cold satisfaction. You didn't even read it, Kara observed. I read enough to know what I'm agreeing to, Stephen replied. Kara's smile didn't reach her eyes. At least you understand your position. This is a business arrangement, Mr. Carter, nothing more. I expect you to behave accordingly. Stephen met her gaze. I understand perfectly. He moved into the Bennett estate 3 days later. Living in Olivia's world was like being a ghost haunting someone else's house. Stephen was given a room on the 2nd floor, far from the master suite where Olivia slept. The room was larger than his old apartment, decorated with furniture that looked like it belonged in a museum. He was afraid to touch anything. Marcus stayed with him on weekends, overwhelmed by the sudden change. The boy wandered the halls with wide eyes, unable to believe this was real. Daddy, there's a room just for watching movies, Marcus whispered one evening, and the kitchen has 3 refrigerators. Stephen smiled, but inside he felt the wrongness of it all. This wasn't their life. They were visitors in someone else's fairy tale. The staff treated him politely but distantly. They knew what he was, a transaction, a convenience. They opened doors for him and called him Sir, while their eyes said something else entirely. Kara made her contempt clearer. She appeared at meals with pointed comments about Stephen's background, his lack of education, his unsuitability for their world. She never insulted him directly. She didn't need to. Every observation was delivered with a smile that made her meaning unmistakable. I understand you were a mechanic, she said one dinner, examining him over the rim of her wine glass. How interesting that must have been. Working with your hands. Stephen kept his voice even. Honest work. Of course, there's dignity in labor, they say. Kara's tone suggested she believed nothing of the sort. Through all of this, Olivia remained distant. They shared meals in silence. They passed each other in hallways without speaking. She spent most of her time in her study, attending to business matters that Stephen wasn't privy to. But sometimes he caught her watching him. When he helped a maid carry heavy boxes she was struggling with. When he thanked the kitchen staff by name for their work. When he sat with Marcus on the floor helping with homework like they used to in the old apartment. She watched, and she said nothing. The first time Olivia truly spoke to him was 3 weeks after he moved in. Stephen couldn't sleep. He had wandered downstairs sometime after midnight, hoping the movement would tire him out. The house was silent, all the staff long gone to bed. He found Olivia in the garden. She sat in her wheelchair beneath a canopy of stars, her face tilted toward the sky. Even in the darkness, Stephen could see the traces of tears on her cheeks. He should have walked away, given her privacy, but something made him step forward instead. Can I sit with you? Olivia didn't look at him. Do what you want. Stephen sat on the stone bench nearby. For a long time, neither of them spoke. The silence stretched between them, but it wasn't uncomfortable. It felt like the silence between two people who had run out of reasons to pretend. Finally, Olivia spoke. My husband died 3 years ago, the same accident that put me in this chair. Her voice was flat, as if she were reciting facts from someone else's life. His name was Jonathan. We were driving home from a fundraiser. A truck crossed the median. He died on impact. I spent 4 months in the hospital. Stephen said nothing. He simply listened. After I recovered, everything changed. Friends who had visited every day stopped calling. Business partners who had respected Jonathan treated me like a child who couldn't understand complicated matters. Even my own mother started speaking to me differently. Slower, simpler, as if the accident had damaged my mind along with my legs. She finally turned to look at him. Do you know what it's like to become invisible? To have people look at you and see only what's missing? Stephen thought about the way strangers clutched their purses when he walked by, the way employers interviewed him with suspicion already in their eyes, the way Tommy's father had looked at him at a school event, as if Stephen were something unpleasant that had wandered in from the street. Yes, he said quietly. I do. Something passed between them in that moment. Recognition, understanding. Two people who had been diminished by the world finding, unexpectedly, someone who saw them clearly. Stephen told her about his life, the years of working double shifts, the wife who left without explanation, the nights he and Marcus had slept in his car because he couldn't afford rent, the shame of watching his son learn to expect less. I used to believe hard work was enough, he said. That if I just kept going, things would get better. Now I'm not sure what I believe. Olivia was quiet for a moment. My mother thinks I agreed to this marriage because I gave up. Because I'm broken and tired and willing to settle for any arrangement that makes my life easier. She met his eyes. She's wrong. I agreed because I was curious about you. Curious how? Ruth said you were desperate but decent. I wanted to see if those things could coexist. Her gaze held his. Most people hide their desperation behind ambition. You hide yours behind silence. I'm not sure which is more dangerous. Before Stephen could respond, she wheeled herself back toward the house. Good night, Stephen. He watched her go, something unfamiliar stirring in his chest. The outside world was less kind. As news of the engagement spread, the whispers grew into a roar. Neighbors who had barely known Stephen now had opinions about him. Former co-workers shook their heads. Strangers on the internet called him names he tried not to read. Gold digger, opportunist, a black man preying on a disabled white woman. The cruelest comments found their way to Marcus. One afternoon, Stephen picked up his son from school and found him waiting on the curb with red-rimmed eyes. What happened? Stephen asked, kneeling to meet Marcus at eye level. Marcus wouldn't look at him. Nothing. Marcus. His son's voice cracked. Tyler said you're a bad man. He said you're only marrying that lady because she's rich and you're too lazy to work for real. Stephen felt something cold spread through his chest. Tyler was one of Marcus's classmates, a boy who had always been friendly before. His mom told him that, Marcus continued. He heard her talking on the phone. She said people like us are always looking for handouts. Stephen pulled his son into his arms and held him tight. What did you say to Tyler? Stephen asked. Nothing. I didn't know what to say. Stephen leaned back and looked at his son's face. What Tyler's mom said isn't true, but I need you to understand something. People are going to talk about us. They're going to say things that aren't fair, and sometimes we won't be able to change their minds. All we can do is know who we are and not let their words make us forget. Marcus nodded slowly. Okay, Daddy. But that night, Stephen noticed his son had stopped mentioning Tyler altogether. Another friend lost, another piece of normal life carved away. He began to wonder if he had made a terrible mistake. The confrontation with Kara came 3 nights before the wedding. Stephen was in the library when she found him. He had been looking at photographs on the mantel, old pictures of Olivia as a child, before the accident, before the wheelchair. She had been smiling in those photos. He hadn't seen her smile once since they met. "You're still here," Kara said from the doorway. "I admit, I'm surprised. I thought you would have taken a better offer by now." Stephen didn't turn around. "What better offer?" Kara walked into the room, her heels clicking against the hardwood floor. She stopped beside him and produced an envelope from her jacket pocket. $2 million, she said. "That's what's inside this envelope. A cashier's check made out to you personally. Take it and disappear. Go build a life somewhere else." "Forget you ever met my daughter?" Stephen looked at the envelope. $2 million. Enough to pay every debt he had. Enough to buy a house, start a business, give Marcus everything he had ever wanted. "Why?" he asked. "Because I know what you are." Kara's voice hardened. "You're a poor black man who saw an opportunity and seized it. There's no shame in that. It's simply survival. But you don't belong in this family, and you never will. Take the money. It's more than you'll ever earn on your own." Stephen finally turned to face her. "You think this is about money?" "Everything is about money, Mr. Carter. Anyone who says otherwise is either lying or foolish." Stephen looked at the envelope for a long moment. Then slowly and deliberately he tore it in half. Kara's composure cracked for the first time. "What are you doing?" "You can think whatever you want about me," Stephen said. "You can call me poor, desperate, beneath you. Maybe you're right about some of it, but I'm not something to be bought off like a problem that needs to go away." He dropped the torn check on the floor. "And neither is your daughter." Kara's face twisted with fury. "You'll regret this. I'll make sure of it." She stormed out, leaving Stephen alone with the ruined check at his feet. He stood in the silence for a long time, feeling the weight of what he had just done. He had rejected the only easy exit. Tomorrow, he would stand at an altar in front of people who despised him and marry a woman who was still mostly a stranger. But for the first time in months, he felt something that resembled peace. He had made a choice. His choice, and whatever came next, at least it would be his. The night before the wedding, Stephen couldn't sleep. He sat in his room, staring at the suit that had been laid out for him. It was expensive, the most expensive thing he had ever worn. But it still felt like a costume, something borrowed for a role he wasn't sure he knew how to play. Around 2 in the morning, there was a knock at his door. It was Olivia. She sat in her wheelchair in the hallway, dressed in a simple robe, her hair loose around her shoulders. She looked younger than usual, more vulnerable. "Can I come in?" Stephen stepped aside. She wheeled herself to the window and looked out at the dark grounds below. "I know my mother tried to buy you off," she said. "Ruth told me." Stephen sat on the edge of the bed. "Does that change anything?" "It confirms something I suspected." Olivia turned to face him. "You're not like the others. The men who came before you, they wanted something from me. Power, money, access. I could see it in their eyes from the moment they walked through the door." She moved closer to him. "When you look at me, I don't see that. I see something else. I'm not sure what it is yet, but it's different." Stephen met her gaze. "When I look at you, I see someone who's been hurt so many times. She's built walls to keep everyone out. I see someone who's testing me because she's afraid to trust." Olivia didn't deny it. "Is that so wrong? To want to know if someone is real before you let them in?" "No. But at some point, you have to decide if you're going to keep testing or start living." She was quiet for a long moment. "Tomorrow," she said finally, "everything changes. For both of us. Are you ready for that?" Olivia didn't answer. She simply looked at him with those dark, searching eyes. Then she turned and wheeled herself out of the room. Stephen watched her go. Tomorrow he would stand at an altar and make a promise he wasn't sure he could keep. He would marry a woman he barely knew for reasons that had nothing to do with love, and he would do it in front of a world that had already decided who he was. But tonight, in this quiet moment, something had shifted between them. Something small but real. It wasn't love. Not yet. Maybe not ever. But it was a beginning. The church was filled with people who had come to witness a spectacle. Stephen stood at the altar in his expensive borrowed suit, facing 300 guests arranged in polished wooden pews. Crystal chandeliers cast soft light across the congregation. Flowers worth more than his old car decorated every surface. Everything was beautiful, elegant, perfect, and everyone was staring at him. He could feel their eyes like weights pressing against his skin. The whispers had started the moment he walked in, low murmurs that rippled through the crowd like wind through grass. He didn't need to hear the words to know what they were saying. Their faces told him everything. In the front row, Cara Bennett sat rigid in pale blue silk, her expression carved from ice. She hadn't spoken to Stephen since he tore up her check. She didn't need to. Her silence was louder than any words. Beside her, in the seat Stephen had insisted on, Marcus sat alone. His son looked impossibly small among all these strangers. Dressed in a new suit that still had the tags on it that morning, Marcus kept glancing around nervously, searching for a friendly face and finding none. Stephen wanted to go to him, to kneel down and promise that everything would be okay. But he couldn't move from this spot. Not now. Not until it was done. The music changed. The congregation rose. And Olivia appeared at the end of the aisle. She was radiant. Her wedding gown was ivory silk that caught the light like liquid pearl. Her dark hair was swept up, revealing the graceful line of her neck. She looked like something from a painting, a vision of beauty that seemed almost unreal. An attendant pushed her wheelchair slowly down the aisle. Olivia's hands were folded in her lap, her face composed, her eyes fixed straight ahead. She didn't look at the guests. She didn't acknowledge the whispers. She looked only at Stephen. When she reached the altar, the attendant stepped back. Stephen moved to stand beside her, close enough to see the rapid pulse at her throat. She was nervous. He hadn't expected that. The minister began speaking, ancient words about love and commitment, promises and partnerships. Stephen heard them distantly, like sounds from another room. His mind was elsewhere, cycling through everything that had led to this moment. The prenuptial agreement he had signed without reading, the tears in the garden at midnight, the $2 million torn in half on the library floor. All of it had been leading here, to this altar, to this woman who was still mostly a mystery. The minister asked if anyone objected to the union. The silence that followed was thick with unspoken dissent. Stephen could feel it pressing against him from all sides. No one spoke, but everyone objected. Everyone except him and Olivia. Then came the vows. Stephen spoke his carefully, meaning every word even if the circumstances were unconventional. He promised to honor her, to stand beside her, to be her partner in whatever came next. His voice was steady. He had made his choice, and he would not waver. Olivia began her vows, but halfway through she stopped. The minister looked confused. "Miss Bennett?" Olivia didn't respond to him. Instead, she gripped the armrests of her wheelchair. Her knuckles went white. Her jaw tightened with effort. And then, slowly, impossibly, she stood up. The gasp that swept through the church was like a wave breaking against rocks. 300 people inhaled at once, their shock echoing off the vaulted ceiling. Cara Bennett's face went pale. The minister stumbled backward. Olivia rose to her full height, her legs trembling but holding. She stood there at the altar, no longer the fragile woman in the wheelchair. She stood like someone who had been carrying a secret for too long and had finally decided to let it go. "I can walk," she said, her voice carrying through the stunned silence. "I've been able to walk for a year." The whispers erupted into chaos. Guests turned to each other in confusion. Cara gripped the pew in front of her as if she might faint. But Olivia wasn't finished. She took a step toward Stephen, then another. Her movements were careful, deliberate, like someone relearning how to trust their own body. She stopped directly in front of him, close enough that he could see the tears gathering in her eyes. "You deserve to know the truth," she said. "All of it." Stephen stood motionless, trying to process what he was seeing. The woman he had agreed to marry, the woman he had thought he understood, had been lying to him from the beginning. "The wheelchair hasn't been medically necessary for a year," Olivia continued. "After the accident, I spent 2 years in physical therapy. It was the hardest thing I've ever done. But I recovered. I can walk. I can run. I can do everything I could do before." Her voice cracked. "But I kept the wheelchair. I told myself it was protection. A way to see who people really were before I let them get close. If they thought I was helpless, I could watch how they treated me. I could separate the ones who wanted my money from the ones who saw me as a person." She turned to face the congregation. 300 faces stared back at her, frozen in various states of shock and confusion. "But look at all of you now," Olivia said, her voice hardening. "Look at what you've been doing for the past 6 months. You called this man a gold digger. You called him a predator. You said he was using a disabled woman for her fortune." She pointed at Stephen. "This man knew nothing about my ability to walk. He agreed to marry me believing I would be in that wheelchair for the rest of my life. He signed away every financial right. He rejected my mother's bribe of $2 million because he refused to be bought." Olivia's gaze swept across the crowd. "And what did you do? You judged him. You mocked him. You taught your children to mock his child because he was poor, because he was black, because it was easier to believe he was a villain than to admit your own prejudice." The church had gone completely silent. No one moved. No one breathed. Olivia turned back to Stephen. "I used you as part of a test you never agreed to take. I let you suffer humiliation and judgment because I was too afraid to trust anyone. That was wrong, and I'm sorry." Stephen looked at her. His mind was still reeling, still trying to absorb everything she had revealed. She had lied to him, manipulated him, made him a pawn in her private game without his knowledge or consent. He should be angry. He had every right to be angry. But when he looked at her face, really looked, he saw something beneath the confession. He saw a woman who had been abandoned so many times that she had forgotten how to let anyone in. He saw someone who had built walls so high that she couldn't see past them anymore. He saw himself. "You lied to me," he said quietly. Olivia nodded. "Yes." "You made me part of something I didn't choose." "Yes." "And you let me face all of this without telling me why." "Yes." Her voice was barely above a whisper now. "I have no excuse. Only an explanation. I was scared. I've been scared for 3 years, and fear made me do something unforgivable." Stephen was silent for a long moment. The entire church waited, hanging on whatever he would say next. He thought about Marcus, sitting in the front row with frightened eyes. He thought about all the times his son had watched adults walk away, his mother, friends, neighbors who stopped calling after they heard the rumors. Marcus had learned too young that people leave. That trust is a risk most people aren't willing to take. What would it teach his son if Stephen walked away now? That the moment things got complicated, you abandon ship? That people who make mistakes don't deserve second chances? Stephen looked at Olivia. "I'm not going to pretend this doesn't change things. You hurt me. You used me. And it's going to take time before I can trust you completely." He took a breath. "But I also understand why you did it. The world hasn't been kind to you. It hasn't been kind to me either. We've both been judged by people who don't know us. We've both built walls to survive." He reached out and took her hands in his. They were trembling. "If we're going to do this," he said, "then we do it honestly. No more tests, no more secrets, no more walls. Just 2 people trying to build something real. Can you do that?" Olivia's tears spilled over. "I want to try." "Then that's enough for now." A small voice cut through the silence. "Daddy?" Stephen turned. Marcus had left his seat and was standing at the edge of the altar, looking up at his father with wide, uncertain eyes. "Is everything okay?" Marcus asked. Stephen knelt down so he was at eye level with his son. "Everything is complicated, but I think it's going to be okay." Marcus looked at Olivia, who was still standing, tears streaming down her face. "Are you mad at her?" "I was. A little. But sometimes people do wrong things because they're scared. What matters is whether they try to make it right." Marcus considered this with the serious expression of a child who has learned too much about the world too soon. Then he looked at Olivia. "My daddy said you play piano really good. Can you teach me sometime?" Olivia let out a sound that was half laugh, half sob. She lowered herself carefully.